It's years behind schedule and tens of billions of dollars over budget, but oil is now flowing through the Trans Mountain pipeline expansion.
Expanding Canada's oil and gas infrastructure has long been a contentious topic, but tough tariffs have forced the country to take a closer look at its sovereignty and self-reliance on its own resources.
Under the gray skies of Vancouver's bustling port, the sound of cranes and cargo ships tells a story bigger than trade. Containers stamped with the red seal of Chinese companies line the docks, whispering a shift in global power that Washington never thought it would see coming. Reports of a quiet agreement between Canada and China have set off political tremors from Ottawa to Washington, igniting headlines that scream, "Trump melts down," as Canada and China launched the Pacific Silk Road. America left out. What began as a series of economic partnerships may now be transforming into something much larger, a strategic alliance that could redefine North American trade forever. For decades, the United States dominated Pacific commerce. From the ports of Los Angeles to Seattle, nearly every major shipping route passed under the watchful eye of American customs, American tariffs, and American influence. But as global economics evolved, so did the ambition of its northern neighbor. Canada, long overshadowed by the US in continental trade, has been quietly constructing its own identity on the world stage, one that doesn't always depend on Washington's approval. Its Indo-Pacific strategy, a plan designed to strengthen economic, diplomatic, and cultural ties with Asia, was initially dismissed as bureaucratic talk. Yet, behind those policy papers lay a deeper intent to link Canada's western ports directly to Asia's booming markets. At the same time, China's Belt and Road Initiative had already transformed continents. For more than a decade, Beijing invested billions in railways, highways, pipelines, and ports stretching across Asia, Africa, and Europe. To its critics, it was a modern form of imperialism. To its supporters, a vision of shared progress. What no one expected was that the next chapter might unfold not in Eurasia or Africa, but across the Pacific, through Canada. Beijing's appetite for infrastructure partnerships and Ottawa's need for diversification made them unusual, yet potentially perfect partners. The result is what many analysts now call the Pacific Silk Road, a trade corridor designed to move goods, energy, and data between China and Canada faster, cheaper, and beyond the grasp of US control. Imagine this: supertankers arriving at Prince Rupert, one of North America's deepest natural harbors, unloading electronics, cars, and rare minerals from Chinese factories. Within hours, those goods are whisked onto Canadian rail lines, upgraded through joint investment deals. From there, they travel east across the Rockies, through Alberta and Saskatchewan, connecting seamlessly to inland ports and logistics centers. Some goods even re-enter the United States through secondary border points, bypassing traditional US West Coast routes entirely. In return, Canada exports its vast natural resources, timber, potash, oil, and liquefied natural gas, directly to Chinese markets through the same corridor. It's faster, more efficient, and far cheaper than routing through congested American ports. The impact on Washington's trade calculus is enormous. For Trump and his allies, who built political capital on reviving American manufacturing and punishing foreign competition, such a development feels like betrayal. The United States has always viewed Canada as a reliable extension of its own economic ecosystem, loyal, predictable, and aligned with American interests. But this new partnership signals that Ottawa might no longer want to play second fiddle. Instead, Canada is positioning itself as a global broker, balancing between two superpowers while quietly benefiting from both. The Pacific Silk Road, in essence, is a statement. The future of trade may not flow through America anymore. Trump's reaction, sources suggest, has been explosive. Behind closed doors, his advisors warn of economic treason and a North American defection. Publicly, he rails against what he calls China's infiltration of Western trade. On social media, his posts paint a portrait of betrayal. Unbelievable. Canada selling out the US to the communists. But even his critics admit he has a point. The United States depends on Canadian cooperation for energy, minerals, and critical infrastructure. Any deepening of Sino-Canadian trade could weaken America's strategic leverage in both trade and defense. In Ottawa, the tone is far more measured. Canadian officials frame the Pacific Silk Road as a pragmatic move, a way to expand exports, attract foreign investment, and reduce dependence on one market. "We must adapt to a changing world," one senior trade advisor reportedly said. "Our prosperity can no longer hinge on one border." But behind the rhetoric, there's nervous calculation. Every handshake with Beijing risks backlash from Washington, every deal scrutinized for security implications. The Canadian government insists its agreements are transparent, balanced, and free from foreign political influence. Yet skeptics warn of déjà vu. Many recall how nations like Sri Lanka and Kenya became ensnared in China's debt diplomacy after accepting massive infrastructure loans. Could Canada, a G7 nation, really fall into a similar trap? Still, the lure is undeniable. China's demand for energy and resources is vast, and Canada's supply abundant. The corridor promises jobs, investment, and access to 1 billion consumers. Provinces like British Columbia and Alberta see opportunity. Ports, refineries, and logistics networks humming with activity. Economists predict the corridor could add tens of billions to Canada's GDP within a decade. For business leaders, the question is not whether to join, but how fast to get on board. Meanwhile, across the border, panic spreads through U.S. industries that once relied on predictable Canadian cooperation. American farmers fear losing export routes. Steel and auto manufacturers worry about rising costs as supply chains shift northward. The U.S. shipping lobby warns that thousands of port jobs could vanish if trade diverts to Canadian terminals. The White House reportedly drafts new tariff lists targeting Canadian goods, while defense officials whisper about strategic vulnerabilities on the northern flank. The alliance, whether real or rumored, has already achieved one thing: it has unsettled the American psyche. But not everyone in Canada is celebrating. Critics within Parliament question the wisdom of inviting Chinese state firms into national infrastructure. They warn of potential surveillance risks, data access through port systems, and subtle political influence. Environmentalists raise alarms about expanded shipping traffic through fragile Pacific ecosystems. Indigenous leaders, whose lands intersect the proposed routes, demand consultation and equity before construction begins. What looks like economic liberation to some appears as sovereignty erosion to others. Despite these tensions, Beijing's message is consistent: cooperation, not confrontation. Chinese state media hails the Pacific Silk Road as a bridge of friendship across the Pacific. They highlight cultural exchanges, green infrastructure goals, and promises of technology transfer. Yet beneath the polished diplomacy lies strategic intent. By securing a foothold in North America's Western Gateway, China gains an unprecedented advantage: access to the U.S. market through a friendly intermediary and influence over continental trade patterns. For Washington, this is not just economics, it's geopolitics in motion. Behind closed doors, U.S. intelligence briefings describe the project as the most significant Chinese advance in the Western Hemisphere since the Panama Canal. Congressional hawks demand investigations, labeling it a national security threat. Defense analysts warn that dual-use technologies could enable Chinese surveillance networks to operate within NATO territory. Trump himself is said to have ordered an emergency review of U.S.-Canada trade relations, calling for punitive tariffs if Ottawa continues to sell out American interests. Yet, despite the threats, the machinery of Canadian pragmatism grinds on. The Pacific Silk Road is not a single construction project, but an idea, a framework that could evolve through multiple agreements, infrastructure upgrades, and bilateral investments. It may not be fully official, but its logic is undeniable. The global economy is shifting eastward, and Canada is adapting before the U.S. can react. In an age where trade routes define empires, geography becomes destiny. And in that geography, Canada's Pacific ports are now the front lines of a quiet revolution. As months pass, Chinese cargo volumes through Canadian ports surge. New warehouses rise in Alberta, financial markets take notice, and Canadian currency strengthens against the dollar. Analysts debate whether Canada has just secured its golden future or tied itself to a geopolitical powder keg. Meanwhile, Trump's political machine turns the crisis into campaign fuel. Rallies echo with chants of "Bring trade back home" and "Stop the Canadian sellout." American media divides along partisan lines, some calling the partnership smart diplomacy, others calling it treason. In reality, both narratives hold truth. The Pacific Silk Road embodies the new global order, one where alliances shift not by ideology, but by economics. Canada, long viewed as America's quiet sibling, is asserting independence. China, ever patient, is expanding influence through opportunity rather than conflict. And the US, caught off guard, faces the uncomfortable reality of competition on its own continent. What happens next will shape the balance of power for decades. If the corridor succeeds, it could usher in an era where global trade no longer revolves around American ports or policies. But if it falters, if debt traps, political backlash, or environmental disasters follow, it could become another cautionary tale of ambition overreach. For now, the world watches as ships glide silently across the Pacific, carrying not just goods, but the weight of history's next great rivalry. Because this isn't just a trade story, it's the story of a continent being redrawn, of alliances tested, and of power slipping through the cracks of old assumptions. Trump's fury may fill headlines, but behind it lies something far deeper, a fear that the world is moving on, and that for the first time in modern history, the United States may not be the one writing the next chapter.